today we have joining us Phumlani Majozi, Senior Fellow at African Liberty and author of this wonderful book here, right? And that is called Lessons from Past Heroes. Phumlani, welcome to the State of the Nation.
Thank you, Mike. It's great to be here. And I'm just glad you've just called my book wonderful.
Yes.
And that's a good start,
to
our conversation. Yeah. Great to be here. Thank you for inviting me, sir.
No. So, I say that because I think the book is necessary.
Yes.
It's necessary because there have been heroes in the past.
Absolutely.
And that's why we call them past heroes, not current heroes, because we're struggling for a hero at the moment, aren't we?
It's a tough one. It's a tough one in SA, South Africa.
You wrote this book with what in mind?
With what in mind? That's a very great question. So this book, I'm a speaker as well. I speak in conferences, and that there was a point where I was invited at a Nairobi conference in Kenya, right? So, and this was about 2017, I do explain in the book. And as I was flying back, Mike, flying over Africa, coming back to Johannesburg, so I pick up this magazine. I think it's Sawubona, the in-flight magazine of South African Airways.
Those
right?
were the days, eh?
Yeah. So I pick up this magazine, the in-flight magazine. It happens that at that year, this is 2017, the ANC government was celebrating the life of Oliver Tambo, who was turning, I believe, 100 or so at the time. So this magazine, inside, as I read through it, it's got a section about Oliver Tambo. And I read about his life, the things he achieved and so on. I'm like, this guy was really an achiever personally. Forget the fact that he was an anti-apartheid activist, a fighter, who stood against the oppressive system, along with many other anti-apartheid activists as well. But he had lived a fascinating life, Mike. And this life was a life of achievement, a life of hard work, a life of family, a life of determination and drive to achieve in life. And I was like, I had never really thought from this perspective about this person, how personally he was an achiever, his goals, his vision personally. And it was and I was like, we don't tell this narrative about the people who came before us in South Africa, especially the people who came before 1994, an era where there was basically real, racism and segregation against Black people. And I said, you know what, I need to come up with a concept and a book that will remind South Africans of these great people, what they achieved in the face of very hard times, before 1994. And I said, let me pick up a few personalities to look, into their personal lives and inspire South Africans. And say to them, listen, guys, there's much you can learn here on hard work, personal responsibility, being driven, being an achiever. These guys could do these things at a very difficult era. What can stop us now? And that's the thesis of the book. And that's what I'm trying to achieve here, to remind South Africans that, look, we are achievers here. There are great guys who have come before us, and we can learn something from them.
Obviously heavily slanted towards people in the realm of politics.
Yes.
Liberation movements, etc. One thing struck me when reading your book is that there's an interesting thing that kept on jumping off the page to me, was that when you're reading almost from the beginning of your heroes in the book, from Pixley, Kaiseka Tsema, the one thing that separates them, especially if you look at in the light of the leadership problem that we have in South Africa, was that almost everybody had another part to their life. Right. In other words, they were multifaceted. Today we live with professional politicians, right? Whereas every one of these people kind of had a job.
And they had...
So their struggle was informed by a lived experience.
Yes.
Right. And I couldn't help but think that would they have been so great had they had a blue light brigade, which means that you don't know if there's traffic lights are out, you don't know if there's traffic, you don't know whether you don't really need to manage your diary, etc. So, without sort of putting too negative a spin on it, What role do you think that these heroes, the fact that they had to also do other stuff, played and influenced their lives?
You see, the thing is, when you look at the cover of the book itself, those people there, those were the black elite of the time, Mike. You know, these guys were highly educated. These guys were entrepreneurs. You know, when you look at Thomas Mapikela in the cover there, he was an entrepreneur from Central, around the side of Bloemfontein, and did amazing things, you know, in business. So these guys were not, politics wasn't something that they were doing it because they are desperate to earn a living. They were doing it because they had an agenda and they felt that they were not recognized in their country. They didn't do it as a professional sort of thing to do, you know, just to make money out of it or to seek fame. They were already doing amazing things on the other side, and they had done amazing things. They had traveled the world. Many of them had traveled the world. They had lived in America and did amazing things there. They had lived in Britain as well. So these guys, they did have that global exposure in understanding you know, the patterns of the time globally, and to take those lessons they got there in those countries and bring them here to make a difference in our country. So the fact that these guys were intellectuals, you know, they had started institutions, they had started newspapers, and they were shaping the conversation, the debate politically, you know, the issues of land at the time, the issues of you know, of governance, the issues of the Union of South Africa, which was basically a state formed at the you know, not accounting for black people's participation, the exclusion of black people, Mike. And that was the nature of the Union of South Africa. And these guys were pushing back against that and being driven by values more than the material stuff. Yes. You see that coming out very well, you know, in their experience, in the work they did, that these people were driven more by the values to achieve, to make a difference, instead of, you know, just to do this thing for professional, you know, objectives and for personal gains and to make money or to accumulate, you know, wealth and so on. They were driven by values and the fact that at the time, black people really didn't have a voice. So these guys had to stand up. Who
stands out for you?
Stands up for me. Damn,
it's a bit like asking a parent which is your favorite child.
Yeah.
But
so let me ask you, Mike, is this question about largely the early 1900s or up until, you know, the guys who include the guys of Richard Maponya, you know, Herman Mashaba? This is now as we get closer to the 80s, the 90s, and so on. Of all the personalities, that's a very big question. I would say, even though, and I must stress this, Mike, that the presidency of Pixley Kaisaka-Seme, his presidency of the ANC, didn't go well, right? Because he did later become a president. And I think historian Bongani Ngulunga, I'm not sure if you have spoken to him, who has done a great biography of Pixley Kaisaka-Seme. He highlights this, and I cite him in the book, that the presidency of Pixley didn't go well when he was president of the ANC. But I think his vision, his ability to take what he had learned, having studied in America, having won awards there, and then moving to Britain to continue with his studies and coming back and really be sort of to come up with the concept of the ANC and being basically the brains around it and mobilizing the people. I would say Pixley really stands out for me, you know, as an achiever of all the people. Very much educated, very much part of the elite, very inspirational, even though his presidency didn't go that well, but to set the foundations and to start mobilizing black people and to get people together to start a movement of, remember, Mike, that black people had never come together nationally ever before, to say, let's take the guys from the East Coast side of Natal, the guys from the Cape Colony, the guys from Central South Africa, to come together and say, let's form a movement that represents every black black person in the country. That had not happened before. So it was something significant to think at that level for black people to come together now, regardless of their cultural backgrounds, their tribe, those differences. Let's do away with that and come together to counter a repressive system that does not recognize us. And Pixley really, and the fact that he did so well in America when he was a student at Columbia University, I just think it was at that difficult time, especially for black people. It wasn't just in South Africa, globally. I would say that he really is a character that stands out for me if I were to, as we've just said, to pick one person.
And in many ways, the Pixley story is interesting to me because as clearly visionary as he was and as intellectual as he was, as you say, you can't. The story isn't complete without looking at his poor presidency of what became the ANC. Right, where he really was an absolute failure. It just goes to show you that not everybody can do everything. You do get some people that are better in a role, even if they may not have the best. There may be somebody with bigger qualifications out there.
Yes, but leadership can be quite. Yeah, it's a different skill. And as Bongani Ngolonga says, that he was a bit dictatorial as well, despotic, when he was president. But I must stress this as well, Mike, and that is the ANC was always divided right from the beginning as well, up until, these factions we see today, the Pologwane outcome, those divisions we see in modern days. Even back then, there were many sort of divisions that had that took effect. You look at even Josiah Gumede, his presidency as well, how he was, ousted. Partly because, as I explained in the book, that there were some factions in the ANC that were not, especially the elderly leaders, that were not really happy with the fact that he was getting the ANC very much closer to communists, and they were not happy with that. So there were many issues that have divided the ANC over decades. So I guess Pixley was part of that those divisions we have seen for a very long time in the ANC. But I must say that originally, of course, the idea and the concept of black people coming together to push back against the racist rule, I think that's commendable. Now, whether they could have along the way sort of handled things better in terms of policy perspectives, the agreements they would have to come to as a party, how they could have addressed those divisions. That they could have done it better, no doubt. They could have done better. But originally the concept was a good one. And one of the very fascinating things, as you say, is that really some people, they may be gifted in crafting a strategy, right? In crafting an idea, in coming together to say, let's change, the resistance, the armed resistance may not work, the armed resistance. Maybe let's choose a different approach. You may have people like that who have that, that kind of thinking, but from being a leader, then that's a different concept. And they fail to lead people and unite. And we learn a lot from guys like Pixley as well and other leaders of the ANC. Yeah.
Into the modern era, you discuss Tambo, the more modern, sort of, let's say, post-Second World War leaders. They come into a new world.
Yes. Yeah.
Africa's busy. Countries in Africa, former colonies are getting independence. South Africa remains a place with question marks if one goes, back to that post-war era all the way up to the new South Africa.
Yeah.
How do you view, having done the research, those leaders? What would you recommend that people should buy your book, which you should all buy this book, but great read for Christmas. But now, moving into the modern era, which of those leaders do you feel had the biggest role in making the ANC the mass liberation movement that it became?
I think Nelson Mandela. He was just something else. Though he spent much of his time being locked up, no doubt about that. But I think that his he was a symbol of that of the oppression of the state, of how oppressive the state was toward black people, and his imprisonment highlighted that. And what really moved me about Nelson Mandela was that he really was also very much a transformer. Because there's a section in the book where I look at what kind of leader he was. He wasn't just a servant, sort of a leader. He was also a transformer as well. He wanted to transform South Africa from a period where basically he was a period of where there were serious racial divisions in the country. Mike, when I speak about CODESA in the book, I highlight something as well. And that is, and even Nelson Mandela points this out in his very great biography, The Long Walk to Freedom, which I cite in the book. And that is the CODESA talks to form a new South Africa, where the first convention ever, where people of different races in South Africa came together to form one state. Now imagine how difficult that would be, given that we are trying to combine, to group people, for them to form a state. People who had never trusted one another ever, right? People who had been warring for centuries, right? People who were that he says that it was perhaps the most. This is Mandela saying that it was the most. CODESA was the most important convention since the convention that formed the Union of South Africa. Now, what made the Union of South Africa convention bad was that, as Nelson Mandela says, it excluded black people. But it was the most important sort of convention since then. But also, I'm saying it was the most so important ever because it really was the basis of people who had never thought of coming together to form the state, now having to negotiate for the way forward. And to have someone like Nelson Mandela on the other side, who was really representing black interests, right? Or even black people, by the way themselves, they were divided. Black people didn't want the CODESA process to be pursued unless some requirements are met. On the other side, we have de Klerk, who I would argue was sort of the leader of the white South Africa, who himself faced challenges on his part. Yet they managed Mandela and de Klerk, to sort of really to push through, to convince their people that this is worth pursuing. So I think Nelson Mandela it wasn't just a matter of him being an anti-apartheid fighter. It was a matter of him at a very, very difficult period now, which is the early 90s, having to convince now black people to say, we need to get into this, to form this one state that we are looking for and move forward to build a united South Africa. So his struggle was in two parts. It's that one where he pushed before he was imprisoned for against the apartheid system, and then getting, of course, being imprisoned, and then the struggle now to really form a new South Africa that pursues reconciliation and aims to build a united society where we were seeing some serious racial divisions.
Do you think he was successful in that?
I think for the first 20 years or so, I think he was. He laid the ground for us to push through, or at least to think intellectually that we have to push through a process of coming together to build a new South Africa. But I'm concerned right now in recent years that we are seeing some more sort of radicalism from some elements who are trying to kill that process of reconciliation. And I do stress and emphasize in the book that it was never going to be easy, Mike. It's never easy to form a state of a people who had been divided for centuries. But what we are doing now is that effort we are slowing down because we are now seeing some interest groups and some people trying to kill that reconciliation process that we are still, or we have been, trying to pursue since our democracy began. Now, as president, we need to be clear here. Nelson Mandela could not achieve everything as per. For him, his duty, especially given his age and the fact that he had 2 terms, we're not going to expect him to be perfect. Expect him to be perfect and to say he got things perfectly right, but to lay the ground, no doubt he did something very positive there. And I would argue that in the first 2 decades or so of our democracy, where we had that spirit of sort of building together, given the challenges that we faced and continue to face.
Now, you mentioned the 2 decades where it looked like where we were building towards a country, for everybody, for all South Africans, that had come out of this terrible past. Where do you see the leadership problem thereafter? What happened where that got derailed?
Oh, that's a great question. By the way, just to give you a bit of, I'm not the only one who thinks this. I was at a conference in London weeks ago, if I can say that. And then there's this gentleman from Europe. He says to me, I tell him I'm from South Africa, and he says, "Wow, that's great." And he says that you guys, I believe that you started quite well. You had a positive story to tell. You had challenges. Every African country has had challenges, but you guys, you had sort of even the economy was doing a bit better. You had a vision of coming together. Your transition was inspiring, right? It inspired many people around the world. But I'm noticing now that not only the economy is in decline, but also I'm seeing more now you've lost it in terms of that, creating that atmosphere of being a rainbow nation and wanting to reconcile and build moving forward. And when I thought, when he said that, I was like, it's the same thing I have been thinking as well. So, and there are people out there who do think that we started quite well, and now we've taken the wrong direction. And then your question is, what happened? It's the politics, right? The politics now, what happened was that, also when you look at even the state of the economy, we were doing well in the first 2 decades or so of our. These are the 2 administrations. I would say a decade and a half from Nelson Mandela to Thabo Mbeki. Even Thabo Mbeki has been speaking loudly about this lately. He has been outspoken. Maybe we should bring him to your interview him here at one point. That the economy was doing very much better under Mandela and him, and the numbers do show that. What happened was that the ANC turned into something else. Now, it became even more factional. And I must say that the ANC, as I said earlier, it was always sort of an organization where there were those divisions and amongst the people. But I mean, under Jacob Zuma, we saw that, because what happened was that you had people within the ANC in the modern era who wanted to basically emerge as leaders of the ANC, and them having emerged as leaders of the ANC, they would be able to have power within the state itself, and use that state now to somehow defend themselves against them, as the justice system was after them. Right. So that was what they wanted to do. And that was the case with Jacob Zuma. He came in as president of the ANC. Many people did like him. Of course, we cannot deny that. But he knew very well that me being emerging as the leader of the ANC and being a powerful man within the ANC would allow me to get into the state and then use the state to be able to defend myself against the legal troubles that I'm going through. And then then it went through him dismantling some key institutions, appointing people who really were not right to lead our institutions, to the treasury itself, changing ministers overnight, appointing people who are not fit to be the leaders of that organization. We saw with the state capture as well. So many things here, and even on policy direction, we saw things we saw wrong stuff being done in terms of the policy direction, which really impacted the economy. And we haven't grown. In fact, when you look at since 2007, the GDP per capita has shrinked, right, or shrunk. So it has. South Africans are poorer now than they were back in 2007, and that's basically that shows you of the nature of how things went in the wrong direction. So the fact here is that the factionalism and personal interests within the ANC are what got us here, are what really crushed us and made our country to be to go downhill.
Now, one of the things when reading the book that struck me is that it's a lot easier to lead when you're fighting against something. And a lot of the examples you give here and you cite here of great leadership, and there's no doubt, wonderful leadership, situational leadership. But it was leadership with one cause in mind. And the cause was quite clearly to break the shackles of apartheid and to enfranchise the majority of the population, the black population. That's like trying to win a war. You can look like a good leader. We see Vladimir Zelensky going around in a T-shirt making great speeches. Right now, he doesn't necessarily, get bad press if the water stops running. Right?
Yeah.
He's being judged purely on a war.
On the war against Russia.
And do you feel that many of the people cited in your book showed great leadership because they were fighting against something, compared to today, where our leaders need to fight for something? And that's a bit of a harder job because it's quite technocratic.
And you need to set up your real agenda. You need to now address the people's problems instead of being fixated on the apartheid system, right? And usually black people were largely united in terms of fighting. We had one common enemy. Yeah. Right.
And one goal. Yeah.
And one goal, right? Now that goal is gone, and now they are more greater. I wouldn't say greater, but there are multiple issues now that we have to address.
And we saw it. We saw it, with the ANC's refusal to view themselves as a political party, but they remained the movement, which means that a movement is sort of the thing that got the country to where it is today, the liberation. But a movement isn't what makes water run out of your taps. That's a political party.
That time of being a movement has passed, right?
Well,
it's time to be a political.
That, but they don't.
They don't know that, which is your point. But your question is, you see, I strongly believe, Mike, that I think history is what makes leaders. Given that Mandela came out to be a figure that he became throughout the process of a world that was sort of finding itself in a Cold War at the time. There were many global tensions that were going on. South Africa was facing this repressive system. It's because of the trends and the history that was taking place at the time that we had a character like Nelson Mandela, right? So and it was also the fact that, as you say, we had one common enemy that we wanted to defeat. And as a result, that created these kinds of leaders that we saw, not only in South Africa, in other parts of the world as well, in Africa, as you said earlier, was going through the process in mid-20th century of liberation from colonial masters. So, and at that time, Africa produced many leaders who were at the time, and even today, many of them were seen as great leaders. Why? Because of the process these countries were going through, the history that these countries were going through. It's what produced those kinds of leaders.
Yeah. Do you think that perhaps a trap that we fall into is to romanticize those freedom fighters as great leaders, but nobody's writing the book about an effective mayor? Or a great municipal, manager, that fixes up potholes. That's the modern fight, isn't it?
Yes.
It's not to go and win the battle. It's not to go and recruit members to fight a war.
Yes.
It is to get council
things working.
employees to wake up on time and go out in their trucks and fix what's broken.
You know, my book, Mike, in the second half of it deals with exactly that.
Right.
So my book is basically in two halves. It's a history of the past and it's about the future, right? How do we address the issues of entrepreneurship?
Yes.
How do we address the issues of the economy? How do we address the issues of broken families? How do we address the issues of of crime in the country that is out of control? So now that part of the book deals with how can we resolve these problems that we have, and then now we can, which is what you are saying. Now we can pick up and make sense of who could be the leaders in today's world, or today's South Africa, who we think are already making some progress or show a good vision, and we must sort of rally behind them as a society and support them. They don't have to be only in politics. They can be in business. They can be in various fields where these people are making a difference for our society. So I've positioned the book to recognize the past, to motivate us to say, look, these guys did amazing things. We can also do them. And then going forward, this is what we must focus on to build a competitive, a fast-growing society that is safe, where we have no load shedding, we have higher employment rates and higher growth rates as well. Because that's what we have to talk about now. You know, those socio-economic issues that you are highlighting, and you know, and this is where now I get attacked by people who are opposed to my agenda when I say, look, guys, we must acknowledge our past, that it did take place. We must never, there's no country that forgets, erases its history. But to say that now we must keep blaming apartheid and say that the building that burned in Johannesburg City and killed at least 70 people, it was because of the apartheid system. No, Mike, that's insane. It's because of poor governance. It's because of incompetence. It's because of the government's failure to address the challenges we face in the country. So for a minister to come through and say, well, it's because, the apartheid system did this and that, they are failing to take responsibility. And that's what my book is about. Let's take responsibility. Even our leaders have to take responsibility. And we must hold them to account where they fail to take responsibility.
What is your view on the state of leadership in South Africa looking forward? Are you optimistic? Are those people out there, the ones we need for a modern country, not a country fighting a war? Do you think those people exist?
Mike, the last chapter of my book is about who we can, well, not the last chapter, as I'm concluding the book, I'm highlighting that we are a country with enormous talent. We are largely a young population. We've got the institutions. We've got the two oceans, which are oceans are usually seen as sources of wealth as well. We've got the talent of the pool of talented people whose skills and knowledge ought to be exploited for the benefit of the country. We do have people who could be leaders in this country. And I list these people from Moles Mbeki, these are the names, to guys like Lumkile Mondi, to guys like David Root. These are guys who have great ideas. Now, the issue is that what we have seen, and this has been the case even within the ANC itself, the people who have integrity, honest people, are hardworking, are right in terms of the vision, they usually get ostracized in politics and marginalized, and the doors get shut. And there's a sad state of our politics that these guys who are this talented, we are not giving them an opportunity. So my point here is that, yes, nationally, at a governance level, I'm disappointed in terms of leadership. From the president himself, I'm very much disappointed. President Ramaphosa, I was amongst those who thought when he came in, he was a positive story. He would be bold and have the spine to reform the country, but we haven't really seen that. So I'm disappointed. If we could get these guys I've mentioned, and people can read the book to check other names and sort of allow them to be in power in the country, this country would do amazing things because it's got the talent, it's got the people who, if they were to be given them the role to lead the country, would be in in the right direction. But currently, at a very senior level, in terms of leadership, we are lacking.
But some elections are upon us, and people have got new choices. I would recommend that everybody get yourself a copy, have a read. You know, it's part history and it's part about the future. You have laid it out brilliantly, Phumlani. Thank you so much. And our next conversation is going to be in the new year, where we're actually going to talk about not the book, but about where South Africa finds itself, what we need to do, and what people need to consider when they go to the polls next year. But for today, I want to thank Phumlani Majozi for joining us today. I'd like to thank you for joining us today, and hope that you'll subscribe to our channel. We are really, just so thankful for all of our members and subscribers. To Phumlani Majozi, thank you so much for coming in today. To everybody that joined us, we'll see you the next time on The State of the Nation. Thank you.